And so next up, podcast listeners, we have a new teenage climate zombie. That's right. We have a new teenage climate zombie. So as you recall, we have Greta Thunberg, who, of course, is the one that came out and said, "How dare you?" And, of course, she has disappeared from the scene for a variety of reasons. One is because she's an adult now. And the other is because, of course, so much of this climate policy that has occurred in Europe has resulted in disastrous consequences for the citizens of Europe, as we have seen with the dependence upon Russian natural gas. So Greta Thunberg, who's lost all credibility, has now a replacement, maybe, and it's a new person. And this particular climate activist went on an interview, and it is hysterical. We're going to play the clip for you in a minute, but we have to set it up. So a teenage climate activist made herself look like a fool on New Zealand radio late last month. And the incident made the girl's mom so mad that the mom wrote a 600-word rebuttal to blast the radio station host for the interview. On September 23rd, 16-year-old, yes, you heard that correctly. It's a 16-year-old climate activist, which, like Greta Thunberg, we need to listen to them because, they're so incredibly worldly and knowledgeable about all things relating to what human beings need in order to survive and how to make them. And they're just experts and they're geniuses. 16-year-old Izzy Cook appeared on New Zealand's News Talk ZB with host Heather Duplessis Allen to talk about the teen's climate change campaign. But the whole interview came to a crashing halt when the radio host wrote out a gotcha against the teen that turned the girl's whole campaign into a joke. So this young girl, of course, is basically saying, she's 16, she's telling the world, and she's, I guess, from New Zealand, and she was on this radio station. The 16-year-old is telling the radio host that people ought not travel, okay, because that is affecting the climate when you take a plane. And, okay, fair enough. There are emissions that come out of the plane. But the left is telling us we must stop like now. No more travel whatsoever. None. Okay? And this is why the left is so bereft of ideas, because, once again, in a normally functioning society, what you would have are people to have a conversation and say, well, let's find a better way to power airplanes. Okay? Or let's find cleaner fuels or something, right? But not just stop traveling. That's idiocy. So the radio show host asks 16-year-old Izzy Cook, who has become this remarkable champion of climate change because she's so brilliant as a 16-year-old. And naturally, just like Greta Thunberg, by the way, her parents are making a fortune from this, which is really what's motivating it, as always is the case. So Izzy gets on the radio station and is asked a few questions. You have to listen to this interview. We have it, and here it is.
For example,
so we would have to apply to have approved events to be able to fly for.
Well, that's one thing that you could look at doing.
Am I allowed to go to Fiji? Is that necessary?
In the current climate crisis, I don't think that that's necessary.
When was the last time you were on a plane?
I'm not sure. Maybe a few months ago, to be honest.
Where'd you go?
Fiji.
Izzy! Izzy! Don't you care about the climate, Izzy?
Of course I care about the climate.
Not enough. You went to... you went to Fiji. Izzy, come on, mate. Are you serious? Are you serious, Izzy?
Well, it's pretty
Are you still
ironic.
there?
It is pretty ironic, but to be honest, it's not really a trip that I wanted to go on, but I can't really get out of it because
Why'd you go? Why'd you go?
My parents wanted to go.
Izzy!
I didn't want to go.
How are you embarrassed that your parents did that to the planet and then forced you to do it as well?
Of course I'm not embarrassed.
Did you have a terrible time?
Not really. I didn't have to do anything.
So come on, you have to admit that is awesome, right? So that's what it should have been done with Greta Thunberg. But the media was so enthralled by Greta Thunberg. Greta Thunberg was the oracle. She had been sent here as the savior of the human race and the savior of the planet. Ladies and gentlemen, by all means, as I've said before, we should be able to talk about and debate the need to run and improve the way we live and improve the environment in every way that we can. Of course. And we should do that through innovation. Okay? That's how we do it. We don't do it by telling people, you need to stop flying on planes. You need to stop using your car. You need to stop using electricity. I mean, that's what the left wants you to do. But here you have a 16-year-old who's literally saying that. And among things, she specifically said, you should stop flying on planes. She goes on this radio station in New Zealand, and the radio host is like, well, when was the last time you flew on a plane? And like an idiot, the 16-year-old, naturally, because it's a child, says, well, I was on a plane, where'd you go? Fiji. Oh, you went to Fiji. Well, wait a minute. That's like, no one goes to Fiji for business, okay? They're going to Fiji to have a good time. That's exactly what you told us, Miss 16-year-old, to not do, that we should stop, having fun and going on vacations and hopping on planes and going to beautiful places like Fiji. Why did you go? Well, my parents made me. Oh, your parents made you. And then she's like, well, yeah, it is kind of ironic. And as Christopher Hopkins said on the other side of the camera, he said, yeah, it's not ironic. It's absolutely hypocritical, which of course it is. And yet we have individuals that are willing to follow on Instagram and believe that a 16-year-old has the answers. And of course, a 16-year-old doesn't have the answers because the 16-year-old is completely and utterly a hypocrite. It's not my fault I had to go. My parents made me go. And then the mom of 16-year-old Izzy writes the radio station and gives a 600-word rebuttal as to why it was wrong for the radio station to ask her daughter questions. You can't ask questions. You can't ask questions about this. It's un-American. It's not allowed. I mean, climate change is settled science, except that in this particular case, the 16-year-old is saying only she can take a plane and go to, of all places, Fiji. But you cannot. And of course, I think we mentioned last week that there was even an article in Headline USA News that a Columbia University professor claims that climate change is giving rise to hate speech. So I would imagine that this particular individual, Izzy, the 16-year-old, and her mom are saying that the radio station engaged in hate speech. How dare they question science? Never question science. Just like the Europeans, right? The European greenies never question science. Yes, we're going to freeze this winter, but don't question science. I mean, we know that the green energy plan is going to work. You might freeze over the winter, but don't question us, ever. We're always correct. And yet we have with us another teenage climate zombie. Hopefully the adults in the room will take over and just say, you know what? It's great. It's wonderful. But, just telling people what they can't do is not the solution. You actually have to have a solution in place of telling people what they should do, right? You should have alternatives, not just your solution.